My name is Petra Valen. I am 30 years old. And the Sunday afternoon my sister stood at the front of a church hall reception and told 47 guests that my hospitalization had been a performance was the day I finally understood that some people do not revise their story about you when the facts change, they just find a bigger room to say it in. I want to tell you what happened at that christening. But the christening is the last point in a line that starts 2 years earlier in a hospital room, and if I begin at the end you will not understand why what happened in that church hall had the weight it had, not just for the people in the room, but for me, standing at the edge of what that day cost and what it finally, irrevocably returned. My name growing up was Petra Havel. I took my husband Michael's surname when we married 3 years ago, which is one of several things my sister Lena has never fully forgiven me for, because she had decided before the wedding that Michael was a distraction from the version of my life she had planned on my behalf. Lena is 34. She is 4 years older than me, and in our family those 4 years functioned less like an age gap and more like a credential, something she had earned by arriving first, that entitled her to a particular kind of authority over the family's shared narrative. She is not, and I want to be precise about this, a person without genuine qualities. She is organized. She is capable. She loves her son Felix with a completeness that I have never doubted. She is also a person who is needed, for as long as I can remember, to be the most competent person in any room she is in, and who experiences any evidence to the contrary not as new information but as a threat to be neutralized. I was, for most of our childhood and young adulthood, the person in the room she least had to work to be more competent than. Not because I was not capable, but because I was quieter about it, and because I had interests that did not translate easily into the metrics our family used to track progress. I worked in the nonprofit sector, grants management, specifically at an organization called the Roven Foundation that funded arts education programs in underserved school districts. It was not a glamorous job by the standards our family applied to careers, and the salary reflected that. Lena worked in commercial real estate and had been promoted twice by the time she was 30, which in our parents' accounting was a kind of trump card she did not have to play explicitly because its presence in the room was sufficient. This is the background. I am giving it to you, because what happened 2 years before the christening did not happen in a vacuum. I was 28 when I was hospitalized. It was September, the first week, the specific kind of early autumn where the weather has not yet decided what it wants to be and the days are still warm, but the evenings carry something different in the air. I had been having a pain in my lower right abdomen for 4 days that I had been managing with ibuprofen, and the specific denial available to someone who works in a sector where taking a sick day requires finding coverage for 3 concurrent grant deadlines. On the 5th day, the pain changed character, sharper, more focused, accompanied by a fever that registered at 38.9 when I took it on my kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, and Michael drove me to the emergency department of St. Anselm's Medical Center, which was 20 minutes from our apartment, in a level of focused quiet that I have since come to recognize as his version of controlled alarm. The attending physician who saw me that night was a man named Dr. Rowan Kozik. He was in his mid-40s, methodical in the way emergency medicine produces methodical people, efficient, precise, making decisions with the speed that an ED at 2 in the morning requires while communicating them with an unhurried clarity that I have been grateful for many times since. He ordered imaging. The imaging showed a perforated appendix. He told me, with the same unhurried clarity, that we needed to move quickly, that this was a serious but very manageable situation with the right intervention, and that he was going to contact the surgical team. I had surgery at 4:30 in the morning. I was in hospital for 11 days total, longer than the standard appendectomy recovery, because the perforation had introduced infection that required monitoring and a course of treatment that could not be rushed. Dr. Kozik was not my surgeon. That was a woman named Dr. Ariana Pinter, who performed the procedure and managed my surgical care, but he remained involved in my case through the early days of my admission, checking in during his ED shifts, and by the time I was discharged, he had become one of the people whose face I associated with the specific relief of coming through something that had, for a period of approximately 72 hours, been genuinely precarious. My family was told within hours of the surgery. My parents arrived at the hospital the following morning. Michael was there the entire time. Lena came on day 3. I want to tell you about what Lena's visit looked like, because it is the hinge on which everything that followed turns. She arrived in the early afternoon, while I was in one of the less acute days, still in the hospital, still being monitored but sitting up and able to hold a conversation. She came in with flowers, which she set on the windowsill, and she sat in the chair beside the bed, and she asked how I was feeling, and I told her, with some accuracy, that I had been better, but that things were improving. She asked about the surgery. I explained what had happened, the perforation, the timing, the 11-day projection my care team had given. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, they do tend to be quite cautious with these things, to protect themselves legally." I said I understood that, and that in this particular case the caution had seemed warranted. She said, "I'm sure it was fine. You know how you can sometimes make things bigger than they need to be." I looked at the 4-line in my arm. I looked at the window. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that I had arrived in an emergency department at 2 in the morning with a perforated appendix and a fever of 38.9, and that nothing about this situation had been made bigger than it needed to be. I said, "I'm just glad they caught it when they did." She stayed for 40 minutes and left. What I did not know, as I watched her leave, was that she had already begun making calls. I found this out over the following weeks from my cousin Wanda, who has the specific quality of a person who believes transparency is more useful than tact, and who told me what she had heard with the uncomfortable forthrightness of someone delivering a necessary piece of information. Lena had told our mother's sister that I had been a bit run down and made rather a drama of it. She had told a mutual friend of ours, a woman named Sabi who worked in the same building as Lena and who I saw perhaps twice a year, that the hospitalization had been not as serious as Petra was making it sound, and that the doctors had been very thorough, which is their job, but it wasn't as urgent as all that. She had told our parents, my own parents, that she thought I had been leaning into the attention, and that they should be careful not to reinforce the pattern. I want to dwell on this for a moment, because it requires a structural explanation and not just a report of the facts. Lena had spent 4 years watching me build something she had not expected me to build. The grant's work at Rovan was not glamorous, and it did not pay the way commercial real estate paid, but by the time I was hospitalized, I had become genuinely good at it, had developed a fluency in foundation relationships and reporting requirements, and the specific negotiation involved in stewarding institutional donors that had earned me a title of senior grants manager and a staff of 2 coordinators reporting to me, which in a nonprofit of 40 people was a meaningful position. I had also married someone she had not endorsed, and the marriage had been, by every visible measure, a good one. And I had, without making any announcement of it, grown into a version of myself that did not require her to be more competent than me in order to feel secure in her own position, because I had stopped measuring myself by the same metrics. This had not been well received. The hospitalization gave her something to work with, an event that could be framed as fragility, a period of genuine incapacity that could be reinterpreted as performance. A set of medical facts that most people in her social network were not equipped to independently verify, and that she could therefore describe in the language of her interpretation rather than the language of the chart. She had been doing this for 2 years by the time Felix was born. Felix arrived the previous winter, and with him arrived the specific reorganization of family attention that a first grandchild produces, all of it, understandably, directed toward Lena and her husband Dariush and the baby, which was correct and appropriate, and which I participated in with genuine warmth because Felix is, objectively, remarkable child, and because my relationship with the idea of my sister is more durable than my relationship with any specific version of her behavior. I sent gifts. I visited when invited. I held Felix at 6 weeks and felt the specific weight of someone new and said the things you say and meant them. The christening was scheduled for the end of October, 14 months after Felix was born. Lena had organized it with a thoroughness she brings to everything she organizes. A ceremony at St. Methodius Church, followed by a reception in the church hall, 47 guests, catered by a company she had researched for 3 months, a seating arrangement she had revised 4 times. She had chosen the Godfather, Dr. Rowan Kozik, herself, a choice that surprised me when I heard it, because I had not known that Lena and Dariush had a relationship with him. I learned, through my mother, that Dariush had met Rowan through a hospital charity board they both served on, that they had become friends over 2 years of quarterly meetings and occasional dinners, and that when Dariush had asked Rowan to be Felix's godfather, Rowan had said yes, without hesitation. I did not know, at the time I learned this, whether Rowan knew that I was Lena's sister. I did not know whether he remembered me from St. Anselm's 2 years earlier. I had thought about calling to find out and had decided against it because it felt like a preparation for a confrontation I did not know was coming, and I did not yet know it was coming. I found out the morning of the christening. I arrived at the church early. Michael and I had driven 40 minutes from our apartment, in weather that had finally committed to autumn, proper cold now with the specific gray light of an October morning that has decided not to be beautiful. We were among the first guests to arrive. I was standing in the vestibule when Rowan came through the door, and we recognized each other at the same moment, and he stopped walking and said, in a tone that was warm and slightly uncertain, "Petra?" I said yes. He said, "I didn't put it together until Dariush mentioned your surname last week. Havel, you were Petra Havel." I said I had taken my husband's name. He said, "I remember your case. The September admission, 2 years ago." He said it with the specific precision of a physician who does not forget the cases that required them to move fast. "You did well. The recovery was a good outcome, given the timing." I said I knew, and that I was grateful. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that was not pity and not discomfort, but something more considered than either. Then he said, "I'm glad you're here." We went into the church. The ceremony was an hour. Felix, who is 14 months old and has opinions about extended periods of stillness, managed it with moderate dignity. Rowan stood at the font and made his promises in a clear voice. I sat in a pew 3 rows back between Michael and Wanda and held the service program and listened to the liturgy and thought about almost nothing, which is what I do in churches, which is one of the things I value about them. The reception in the church hall began at noon. The hall was a large rectangular room with high windows and round tables laid with white cloths, the catering company's setup visible in the organized warmth of it. Chafing dishes on a side table, a drink station, a small area near the front where the cake and gift table were arranged. 47 people filled it comfortably. I found our table. Michael and I were seated with Wanda and her partner, and 2 of Dariush's colleagues I did not know well, and we sat down and the room settled into the specific warmth of a post-ceremony gathering where everyone is pleased that the ceremony went well and is ready to eat. Lena gave a welcome speech about 10 minutes into the reception, before the food was served. This was her organizational instinct. Address the room while you have it, before the eating and the side conversations scatter its attention. She stood at the front with a glass, and the room quieted, and she thanked people for coming. She thanked Dariush. She said something about Felix that made people smile. She thanked the caterers and the church. She thanked Rowan, by name, for agreeing to be godfather. Then she said she wanted to take a moment, while the people she loved were all in one room, to address something that had affected the family over the past 2 years. I felt Michael's hand find my arm under the table. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on Lena. She said that the previous 2 years had involved a period of difficulty, a family health situation that had required a great deal of collective energy and attention. She said she wanted to be transparent with the people who knew and loved her family about how that period had felt from the inside. She said that the situation had been presented to us as a crisis, and she paused there, with the specific weight of a pause that is designed to carry meaning, when in fact, looking back, what we were dealing with was something rather more manageable than we were led to believe. She said that she had found it necessary to be quite careful, going forward, about how much weight to give to certain kinds of presentations, and that she hoped the family could move into Felix's life with a cleaner foundation. She said she needed the sympathy, and she milked it. 47 people heard that sentence. Rowan Kozik, who was sitting 3 tables to my left, was one of them. I pressed my thumbnail into the center of my palm. Not hard, just the specific pressure of a fixed point, something to locate myself against while the room processed what had just been said. I looked at the centerpiece on our table, a small arrangement of white chrysanthemums in a low vase. I did not stand up. I did not turn toward Lena. The room made a sound, not quite murmuring, more the collective shift of people adjusting their posture, the physical equivalent of uncertainty. Then Rowan stood up. He did not wait to be called on. He stood with the specific, unhurried quality of someone who has decided to speak and has arranged his words before standing. He was at the table to my left, and he rose, and people looked at him with the expectant attention that a godfather at a christening reception naturally commands, and he said, in a clear and level voice, "I'd like to say something, if I may." Lena, still at the front of the room, turned to look at him. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The composure remained, but something underneath it recalibrated. Rowan said he had known, when Dariush asked him to be Felix's godfather, that he was joining a family he did not fully know yet. He said that one of the things he had learned about the family in the months since was that its members had been navigating something difficult, and he had wanted to understand that history better before today. He said that this morning, in the vestibule, he had had the opportunity to speak with someone he had treated professionally 2 years ago, a woman he had seen in the emergency department at St. Anselm's Medical Center on a September night when she had arrived with a perforated appendix and a fever of 38.9 and had required emergency surgical intervention. He said the patient's name was Petra. He said that in his professional assessment, documented in his admission notes from that night, the situation had been acute, that the timing of her presentation had been, in his clinical language, within the critical window, and that a delay of another 12 to 24 hours would have materially changed the outcome and the complexity of the intervention required. He said he was telling the room this not to contradict anyone, but because he believed that when someone asks you to stand at a baptismal font and make promises about truth and integrity on behalf of a child, the least you can do is practice those things in the room. Then he sat down. The room was quiet for a breath that lasted longer than a breath usually lasts. Lena was still at the front. She was holding her glass, and she was looking at Rowan, and the glass was not moving. Her husband Dariush had his eyes on the tablecloth in front of him. My mother, who was at a table near the window, had both hands flat on the table and was looking at me with an expression I have replayed many times since and still find difficult to summarize in a single word. My father looked at the wall. Wanda, to my right, let out a breath that was slow and deliberate. Michael's hand, still on my arm, stayed where it was. I did not stand. I did not speak. I pressed my thumbnail into my palm once more, held the pressure for a count of 3, and released it. I looked at the chrysanthemums. I picked up my water glass and drank from it, which was the most ordinary action I could think of, and I put it back down. After approximately 30 seconds, during which no one in the room appeared to breathe with any ease, someone at a table near the back made a remark to the person beside them in a low voice, and the room found the exhale it had been looking for and the ambient noise of 47 people remembering that they were at a christening reception gradually returned. Lena moved away from the front of the room. She went to the table where Dariush was sitting, and she sat down beside him.
She did not look at me.
Dariush said something to her in a low voice, and she shook her head slightly, once, and then she was still. The food was served. I ate. I spoke with Dariush's colleagues, who asked about my work and seemed genuinely interested in the grant cycle for arts education programs. I held Felix for approximately 8 minutes while his mother was occupied across the room, and he looked at my face with the specific focused gravity of a 14-month-old encountering a face he's not certain about. And I said his name, and his focus resolved, and he grabbed my thumb. I did not speak to Lena at the reception. I did not engineer that outcome. The room was large enough and the afternoon long enough that it was simply what happened, and I accepted it as such. Michael and I left after the cake was cut, which was the natural departure point, and I thanked Dariush, who held my hand for a moment longer than a handshake usually lasts, and said, quietly, "I'm sorry, Petra." I said there was nothing he needed to apologize for because there wasn't. He had not given the speech, and he had chosen a godfather who turned out to know the truth, and both of those things were his to live with in whatever way he chose. In the car, Michael drove, and I sat with my hands in my lap and watched the October gray moving past the window and said almost nothing for the 40 minutes home. What I did not know on the drive home was the shape of what would follow. I knew what had happened in the room. I did not yet know what it would mean for the structures Lena had built on the story she had been telling. The first consequence arrived through my mother. My mother called me 4 days after the christening, on a Thursday evening when I was at my desk reviewing a grant report that was due the following week. She said she had been thinking. She said she had been thinking since the hospital, actually since my hospitalization, which she said now, for the first time in 2 years, using that word directly, without the cushioning language of that whole situation, or what happened in September. She said the hospitalization. She said she had listened to Lena's version of things for 2 years and had found it easier to accept than to question, because questioning it would have required a conversation with Lena that she had not known how to begin. She said hearing Rowan speak in the church hall had been like a door opening in a wall she had not known was there. I told her what I had wanted to tell her for 2 years, that the perforation had been real, that the 11 days had been necessary, that the fever had been a clinical indicator and not a performance, that I had not wanted to be in a hospital for 11 days in September and would have chosen differently if choosing had been available to me. I told her what the admission note said. I had requested a copy during my discharge process, which is something I had done because I document things, because documentation is my professional habit, and because some part of me had understood, even then, that the record might matter. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she said, "I should have asked you directly 2 years ago." I said I understood why she hadn't. She said that was not the point. I said I knew. We talked for an hour. It was the longest phone call we had had in 3 years and the most direct, and at the end of it something had shifted between us that I do not have a clean word for. Not repaired, not resolved, but reopened. The door Rowan had found in the walls staying open rather than swinging closed again. The second consequence was professional, and it arrived in a way I had not anticipated. Lena worked in commercial real estate. Her professional network in the city was substantial. She had been building it for a decade, and it included people in finance, in development, in several adjacent industries. What I did not know was that this network overlapped at specific points with the hospital charity board that Dariush and Rowan both served on. I learned this from Wanda, who learned it from Dariush's colleague at a dinner 6 weeks after the christening. 3 of Lena's professional contacts were connected to people who had been in the church hall. One of them had asked Dariush directly about what had happened at the reception. Dariush had told the truth. Not elaborately, not with any evident desire to damage Lena. He told it because he was asked and because he was not a person who maintained comfortable fictions under direct questioning. He said his wife had made a statement at the reception that had turned out to be incorrect, and that the attending physician from the relevant hospitalization had been present and had set the record straight. The version that circulated from there was not dramatic. It was specific. Lena had said something about her sister at a family event, and the doctor who had treated her sister had been in the room. That was enough. In a professional network that ran on reputation and on the specific social confidence that comes from being someone whose account of events is reliable, the story had a quiet and lasting weight. I did not engineer this. I did not tell Wanda anything she did not already know. I did not contact Dariush's colleague or anyone connected to Lena's professional network. What I did was exist with my documented medical record in a room where Rowan Kozik happened to be standing, and the rest followed from that in the specific way that things follow when a story meets a witness. The third consequence was Rowan himself. I called him 2 weeks after the christening. I had his number from the missed call he had made to my mobile the morning after. He had called to say that he hoped the afternoon had not been too difficult, and that he was available if I wanted to talk. I had not called back immediately because I was not ready to put language to what the afternoon had been, and I had learned over the years that some things need time before they can be spoken about accurately. When I called, he answered on the second ring. I thanked him for what he had said. I told him he had not been obligated to say it, that I understood it had not been a simple thing to do in that room, in front of Dariush's family and his own new role as Godfather. He said he had thought about it for about 15 seconds after Lena finished speaking, which was all the time he needed. He said he had been in emergency medicine for 19 years, and that there was a specific kind of revision of clinical reality that he had encountered before, and that he had a professional and personal commitment to not letting it stand unchallenged when he was in a position to challenge it. I said I was glad he was Felix's godfather. He said he was too. We did not become close friends in the aftermath. He is Dariush's friend first, and my brother-in-law's social world is not my own, and the overlap is limited. We did not become close friends in the aftermath. He is Dariush's friend first, and my brother-in-law's social world is not my own, and the overlap is limited. But when Michael and I attended Felix's first birthday party 6 months after the christening, Rowan was there, and we had a conversation over cake that was easy and specific and did not require either of us to reference the christening, because what had happened there was settled in a way that did not require rehearsal. Lena was at the birthday party. She was, as she always is, organized and capable and attentive to Felix. We did not have a direct conversation about the christening at the birthday party. We have not had that conversation yet. I do not know when we will. Perhaps we will. Perhaps we will find a way to it when the conditions are right. Perhaps it will be the kind of thing that is acknowledged rather than processed, in the specific way families acknowledge things they cannot fully untangle. I hold that as an open question rather than an unresolved wound, which is something I have had to work to arrive at. What I know is that Lena stopped circulating the version. Not because I confronted her, not because anyone told her to, but because the room she had chosen for it had turned out to contain a man who knew the chart, and the story could not outlast that. I am telling you this story 22 months after the christening. Felix is now 3, and he walks with the confident instability of a person who knows exactly where he is going and has not yet fully negotiated with gravity. I see him when I am invited, which is more often than I expected. My mother and I talk every week, which is more than we talked for the 2 years before Rowan stood up. My work at Rowan is the best it has been. 18 months ago, I led the application for a multi-year funding commitment from a national foundation, a grant of $3,847,000 over 3 years, which is the largest single award in the organization's history, and which I wrote almost entirely alone over 14 weeks. Submitting it on a Tuesday morning with 6 minutes to spare on the deadline, and then going to make tea and sitting at my kitchen table and letting the weight of those 14 weeks settle. The award came through 11 weeks later. My executive director, a woman named Dr. Farida Osei, who runs the organization with the specific combination of vision and rigor that makes working for her genuinely instructive, sent an all-staff email that used the word extraordinary, which she does not use lightly. I thought about what Lena had said in the church hall. I thought about the version of me she had been maintaining, the one who milked things, who needed sympathy, who could not be trusted to give an accurate account of her own experience. I thought about what that version of me would have been capable of by its own internal logic, and I thought about the grant application on the server, 114 pages, with my name in the header. I did not send Lena the announcement email, though the organization sent it to its stakeholder list. I do not know if she received it. I do not know if it changed anything for her. That is her accounting to do, not mine. What I know is what I built during the years she was circulating a story about me. The 11 days in the hospital, the recovery, the return to work, the portfolio of grants that grew while she was telling people I was performing fragility, the documentation I kept, by professional habit and by something that might have been instinct, against a moment I did not know was coming. The record that survived the room because it was true, and because one person who knew it was true happened to be standing at the baptismal font. Some people spend their energy revising the story of you. They invest in the revision the way you invest in a position, with increasing commitment as the stakes rise, until the story and the investment become the same thing, until admitting the story is wrong means losing something they cannot afford to lose. And when the truth arrives, not because you forced it, but because it was always there in the chart, in the notes, in the memory of the man who was on call that night. What collapses is not just the story. It is the whole structure built on the expectation that no one would ever check. I stayed in my seat. I pressed my thumbnail into my palm. I watched Rowan stand up. The record did the rest. What I want to say to you, if you have ever had someone take the worst thing you survived and try to make it smaller than it was, if someone has stood in a room and described your reality as performance, as manipulation, as something you manufactured for the attention it brought you, is that the record exists.
You did not invent it.
The chart is there. The admission notes are there. The dates and the clinical language and the attending physician's signature are there, and they do not require anyone's permission to be accurate. You do not have to correct the room. You just have to make sure the room has the right people in it. The moment I return to is not Rowan saying my name. It is the moment he said the words within the critical window, because that phrase, which I had first heard from Dr. Pinter during my discharge conversation, and which I had written in a notebook and kept, was so precisely the language of my actual experience that hearing it spoken aloud in a church hall 2 years later, in front of 47 people who had been given a different version, produced a sensation I have never found the right word for. Not vindication exactly. More like accuracy. The return of something that had been taken. Tell me in the comments. Was there ever a moment when someone tried to make the hardest thing you survived sound like nothing, and then the one person who knew the truth was standing right there in the room? I want to hear what that felt like for you. I read every comment. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment. It matters. And if you want to be here when the next one goes up, subscribe and hit the bell. I put out a new story every week, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for being here.